You were there at the start. You've been there every single day since, and I will never forget. Believe me, Arizona, I will never forget.
The 45th President of the United States makes a trip to Arizona.
Arizona makes sense in that immigration is an issue he wanted to get back to.
Visiting the border and Phoenix.
This guy is the antithesis of everything that this country stands for. And it's just amazing to me that so many thousands of people are still drinking his Kool-Aid.
Trump 2020.
How often do you get a chance to see the greatest man in history?
This is Arizona Week. Hello and thanks for joining us. Donald Trump, America's 45th president, visited Arizona this week. The commander-in-chief beginning his tour on the U.S.-Mexico border in Yuma. The first time in more than 10 years a U.S. president has visited Arizona's border with Mexico. President Trump and Secretary of State John Kelly flew into Marine Corps Air Station Yuma and met with men and women from Customs and Border Protection. A first-hand look at tools used for guarding the border. Just outside the base, hundreds gathered. Total time on the ground about 2 hours. Then Air Force One departed MCAS Yuma en route for Phoenix. Lining the streets, thousands of supporters and protesters. Heavy police presence anticipating a clash between those for and against the president. We turn now to Arizona Public Media's Christopher Conover.
No Trump! No KKK! Fascist USA!
Hours before President Donald Trump began his speech at the Phoenix Convention Center,
This is what unity looks like!
protesters began showing up across the street. Over time, the crowd grew from a few hundred to thousands who braved temperatures close to 110 degrees to let the president, his supporters, and the rest of the nation know they don't approve of the chief executive and his policies.
Enough is enough. As a straight white male, it's time to carry a sign. It's time to come out and say, we can't sit at home and be regulated to watching what's happening now. It's important to come out and band together and stick up for what's right.
Most of the people we talked with in Phoenix on Tuesday were from Arizona. The deadly turn of events in Virginia was on their minds.
We can't be stopped by fear. We can't let them terrorize us. So we have to show up.
You're a bunch of wicked communist sympathizers. Our streets! Our streets!
Other than the rare skirmish between anti-Trump protesters and Trump supporters on hand to hear the president, the night was peaceful. Police created and maintained a buffer between the two sides. But the gulf between the two groups did not stop the heckling and jeering.
Shame! Shame!
Trump supporters waiting to get into the convention center knew they would face the protesters. They weren't all impressed.
We already walked through them.
It was a blast listening to them. So.
We walked through them on the way here.
Well, as long as it's peaceful, I think it's great. We talked to a few on the train that had a different point of view and had a really robust, nice, positive conversation with somebody who was coming down to protest. And, she had her points, but we had a really good conversation. And I enjoyed that a lot. I was kind of afraid, getting on the train. But to tell you the truth, we talked to a few, and everybody was very respectful.
Back on the opposition side of the street, protesters wondered why thousands of people showed up to listen to the president.
Despite the heat, and it's miserable out here, I can't stay silent anymore. I've been opposed to this guy from the beginning, but I'm Jewish and I'm gay, and this guy is the antithesis of everything that this country stands for. And it's just amazing to me that so many thousands of people are still drinking his Kool-Aid.
And following the events in Charlottesville, they hope their message would also start to resonate.
We can disagree politically, but what he said about Charlottesville and equating the two sides morally, that just kind of upset me.
The protests lasted for hours, and for the majority, it was a peaceful event.
Inside the Phoenix Convention Center, thousands. A campaign rally with an all-star lineup. Secretary of Housing Ben Carson.
And there are others in our society now who are trying to fill us with the wrong things. The purveyors of hatred and division. They want to divide us on the basis of race, income, age, religion. But you know what? We are much too smart to fall for that garbage.
Followed by Alveda King, the niece of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Oh Lord, forgive us. Fan the flames of revival. Amen. Yes, yes, yes. Today we pray for our leaders that they will walk in your ways, accepting the wisdom and godly counsel of your word.
A prayer with famous evangelist preacher Franklin Graham.
We ask tonight for your help. There are those in this country who want to divide, who want to preach hate. And Father, it's my prayer that you'll just shut their mouths like you shut the mouths of the lions years ago.
And then the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence.
You know, if the past 7 months have shown us anything, it's that President Donald Trump is a man of his word and he's a man of action. Since inauguration, President Trump has been busy keeping the promises he made to you and to every American. 7 months of action, 7 months of results, and 7 months that will be remembered as the days we began to make America great again.
Widely expected to be a unity speech, the president spoke to thousands of supporters for about 75 minutes.
Our movement is a movement built on love. It's love for fellow citizens. It's love for struggling Americans who've been left behind, and love for every American child who deserves a chance to have all of their dreams come true. From the inner cities to the rural outposts, from the Sun Belt to the Rust Belt, from east to west and north to south, our movement is built on the conviction that every American from every background is entitled to a government that puts their needs first.
I'm joined now by professors here at the University of Arizona, and both study things like politics and communications. Dr. Kenski and Dr. Klar, thanks to both of you for being here. Let's start off with you, Dr. Klar. Why did Donald Trump come to Arizona 7 months into his presidency?
Well, I think it makes sense that he wanted to have a friendly event with a friendly crowd, given the critical coverage he's received in the past couple of weeks. Arizona makes sense in that immigration is an issue he wanted to get back to, sort of the theme of his, I want to say campaign right now, because he really is sort of running a campaign, is this idea that he's keeping his promises, that he's committed to his promises. And immigration was a huge promise that he made to the American people. So I think Arizona sort of made sense from that perspective.
Kate, do you agree? Is the border maybe the reason why he came here?
I definitely agree with what was said. I would also add that Arizona is a right-leaning state, so it's favorable, but it's also one that can potentially swing during presidential elections. And if one is interested in midterms and there happens to be a Senate race coming up, I think it makes sense to start those campaigns now if you anticipate there could be challenges. And so it's friendly on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's one that I think the Republicans are going to continuously have to work at to keep in their corner.
I want to listen in now to one of the very early statements by the president.
The American people voted for immigration control. That's one of the reasons I'm here.
So he comes to Arizona because it's a conservative state, it's on the border, people want to hear about immigration. It's an issue that, if you will, it hits close to home.
He really wants to make an argument to Arizona voters that he will do what he said he is going to do when it comes to immigration.
Dr. Kenski, who are these Arizona voters that he's appealing to? Who is really his base? Because Republicans seem somewhat hesitant to fully support him, but here he is on what he describes as his conservative values.
Well, I would say that Republican leadership at a time is kind of hedging their bets. But I think if you look at the base itself, the precipitous drops that I think we're seeing in in approval ratings, are not coming from the Republican base. Mm-hmm. They're coming from other areas. Right now, overall, we've seen an increase since he took office, with his disapprovals going up. And so, those increases, aren't necessarily coming from the citizens who are Republican. So that is quite different from politicians who are Republican.
Okay, during his speech, he made reference to a few different ideas that I want to get your take on. Let's listen to that now.
This evening, joined together with friends, we reaffirm our shared customs, traditions, and values. We love our country. We celebrate our troops. We embrace our freedom. We respect our flag. We are proud of our history. We cherish our Constitution, including, by the way, the Second Amendment.
Dr. Kenski, these are things that Democrats and Republicans could both say they support. Is that fair that he's trying to appeal to a couple different groups of people?
I'd say definitely. I think it's not a surprise that one would emphasize, though, that the Second Amendment inside Arizona itself. Arizona, as I mentioned, tilts Republican, but we do have a libertarian streak that tends to run through Arizonan values. And I think that thinking about the Second Amendment, really aligns with some of those values.
Dr. Klar, you study independents as well, that were a huge part of this year's election or last year's election. Where are they now right in Arizona?
The independents, as Dr. Kenski was saying, it's the independents and the Democrats who have increasing disapproval of Trump. Republican approval of Trump has been fairly steady, but he's losing a lot of support among the independents, and the independents in Arizona are a really large segment. And as we've talked about before, the independents really aren't necessarily independent. The vast majority of them do prefer one of the two major parties. So he's really losing support among a lot of people who might otherwise identify as Republican, but probably something to do with Trump or with the Republican leadership right now in Washington makes them sort of disguise behind this label of independent.
Okay, now I want to go to the earlier comment that you made about the Republican Party in Arizona. He went after leadership. Let's listen to that.
Please, please, Mr. President, don't mention any names. So I won't. I won't. Think we were just one vote away from victory after 7 years of everybody proclaiming repeal and replace. One vote away. One vote. One vote away. And nobody wants me to talk about your other senator who's weak on borders, weak on crime. So I won't talk about him.
Hours earlier, Senator Jeff Flake visited Tucson and addressed the so-called feud with the president.
No, I vote with presidents when I believe they're right. I oppose them when I think they're wrong, whether Republican or Democrat. That's what an Arizona senator should do.
Nobody wants me to talk about him. Nobody knows who the hell he is. And now, see, I haven't mentioned any names, so now everybody's happy.
Okay, Dr. Kenski, you've been studying this sort of thing for a while now. What is happening there where he doesn't specifically mention names? We all know what he's talking about. It's very clear he's taking some shots at Republican leadership. So what do we make of this?
Well, it's a very actually powerful rhetorical tool. Tony Schwartz, who created ads for the Democrats, would call it partipulation. What he's doing is he's leaving something blank, but the audience is filling those names in, and that makes the argument all the more powerful. And so he's capitalizing on that. And I think it's, it's very clear in both instances who he was talking about, but it generates talk and it generates fervor around that argument. And so I think it does bolster the supporters. I think for those who are well studied in Arizona politics, I mean, one would be hard-pressed not to call either of Arizona's senators conservative. They are both conservative senators. And so I think what you're really seeing here is a clash between a different style of Republican against what I would call traditional conservatism, played out.
Samara, does that make sense to you, where we are seeing maybe a hybrid of conservative or Republican that is suddenly, he has the same values and ideas, but it's not quite meshing with what we see as traditional?
Yeah, well, I mean, his whole campaign since the very first day was the sort of anti-establishment message, which is a bit ironic because that used to be John McCain's thing. I mean, he was sort of the anti-establishment Republican. And Donald Trump has really taken that to a whole other level, to put it mildly. But I think what he's doing in criticizing the senators is probably not going to work in his favor. I mean, he ultimately does need their support if he actually wants to keep his promises. So I think it probably is very effective in terms of rallying support among this core group of voters. But what he really needs right now is support among Republican senators.
Okay, and maybe support from the media. Let's listen in on that.
I know these people probably better than anybody. And a lot of people have a problem with it because, look, what happens with them, if they're doing a story about me, I know if it's honest or false. If you're reading a story about somebody, you don't know. You assume it's honest because it's like the failing New York Times, which is like so bad. It's so bad. Or the Washington Post, which I call a lobbying tool for Amazon. Okay, that's a lobbying tool for Amazon. Or CNN, which is so bad and so pathetic, and their ratings are going down.
Okay, he's very specific, directed towards certain networks. Where does this take us? Because I personally was there, and there was certainly some friction directed toward the media. Are the media covering him fairly?
You know, I think this talking point for him, this anti-media message, is one of his most successful messages in terms of garnering support from his base. Hating on the media has just become an incredibly easy tool for him. I don't think it's terribly productive in terms of his policy agenda, that's for sure. And it really increasingly seems like it's becoming dangerous.
That speech to the media, about 30 minutes worth, a sentiment shared by others.
These are truly dishonest people. And not all of them, not all of them. You have some very good reporters, you have some very fair journalists. But for the most part, honestly, these are really, really dishonest people. And they're bad people. And I really think they don't like our country. I really believe that. And I don't believe they're going to change, and that's why I do this. If they would change, I would never say it. The only people giving a platform to these hate groups is the media itself and the fake news.
For more on that, department head and Professor Dave Cuillier from the University of Arizona School of Journalism. In full disclosure, we should note that I do serve as an adjunct instructor.
I think it's really important that we do look at the potential violence that's occurring in this country. I mean, the Committee to Protect Journalists traditionally has looked at violence against journalists around the world, in Mexico, Middle East. Now they've turned their attention to the United States. And this year they've started tracking affronts to the press. Today we're up to 63. 16 of those are violent attacks against journalists, being pushed, punched in the face, body slammed. We're going to see violence against reporters and photographers in this country. And that's something we should all be concerned about. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a journalist, a lawyer, a congressman, an immigrant, person of color. We cannot have violence directed and targeted by our president.
Internationally, journalism has been a dangerous industry, but not so much in the United States. You're saying that perhaps we're about to see that.
Oh, we are seeing it. It's not about to happen. It has happened. And this is what's dangerous. A president stirring up, fomenting hatred toward a particular class. And it's not just journalists. He's targeting it toward anybody who criticizes him. Judges who overturn his policies, members of Congress, including our 2 senators who oppose him. Anyone who criticizes him is being attacked, and that list of so-called enemies of the American people is growing.
Dave, there are folks who are watching this and will say that attacks on the media are free speech. What do you say to them?
Oh, absolutely. It's free speech to criticize the media, and a lot of the criticism is well-founded. The problem is when you cross the line into incitement of violence. That is not protected speech. And I think it was probably clear to say that Trump at the rally nearly incited the crowd to start punching the journalists there. So they didn't, fortunately, but that's where we cross the line from free speech to unprotected speech. And I think that's what we have to be concerned about.
Yeah, there's a certain level of decorum that's expected.
Well, I'm fine with no decorum. I'm fine with rowdiness, offensiveness. I'm a First Amendment purist. But I also recognize the boundaries of the First Amendment. And when you start inciting people to hurt journalists, punch them, body slam them, club them, shoot them, kill them, that's where it crosses the line.
What makes you say those specific examples? What sort of things in his language has really encouraged that?
Well, he's used words describing the press such as dirty, sick, liars, fake, enemies of the American people. A lot of these words have been used by other denigrated groups in the world, by those who would like to oppress them and rile up the public to attack them. And we've seen that in history. So those words are disconcerting, no matter who he targets those words at.
And that's why these conversations are important, to call attention to it.
Oh, right, absolutely. We don't want to get to that point in this country. Other countries have crossed that line, and it's not pretty. And in our country, we stand for something. We stand for being able to talk and debate and disagree, and that's fine. We need to fight with words, but when that starts crossing into fists and tiki torches and clubs and guns, well, that's where we are no longer America.
And many say that unconventionalism that we see in the president is what makes him appealing. We spoke with one man who stood right behind the president during the Phoenix rally. Originally from New York, he feels connected to the commander-in-chief.
He is a guy who loves people, and I don't see how everyone tells the story that he's a person of hate. I've just never seen that. And when I've run across him, when I've met him, when I hear him speak, when I've heard him speak, I've just never seen hate coming out of his mouth. I thought I'd be behind him and you wouldn't see me, but then everyone told me I was front and center, so that was interesting.
No anxiety about that at all, being on national TV?
No, I just wanted to make sure my hair was okay.
Like his, right? There's no question President Trump is different than other presidents of the past. The polls show he has slowing, though steady support from his base in Arizona.
Overall, if you look at current polling, there's a poll just released recently which shows President Trump has a just under water approval rating, I think 47% to 52% overall. However, he's extremely popular with Republicans, still with 3/4 of Republicans are in favor of him, only 6% of Democrats, and roughly about just over a third of independents are in support of Trump in Arizona.
Those numbers different from another poll conducted by OH Predictive Insights in Phoenix. This one related to former Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who many thought might be pardoned by the president in Phoenix on Tuesday.
Do the people in this room like Sheriff Joe? Was Sheriff Joe convicted for doing his job? That's what. He should have had a jury, but you know what? I'll make a prediction. I think he's going to be just fine, okay?
No pardon. Pollster Mike Noble says that's something the vast majority of people did not want anyway.
Because you have Donald Trump, which has almost basically 100% name ID, but then you look at Sheriff Joe, most elected officials in general, unless you're the president, usually are not that well known. Sheriff Joe, everyone knows who Sheriff Joe is in Arizona. So we wanted to ask just simply, you know, they know about the conviction, they know about the potential pardon, they know about the rally. So we wanted to ask them, given the situation, well, what do they think? And they think it's a bad idea.
The very idea of the pardon is what drew many protesters to downtown Phoenix Tuesday. And as the speech ended, those who came to protest the president stayed behind and police ready to respond. In the end, 4 people were arrested. President Trump made the trip to Arizona as a campaign rally, well ahead of an election schedule. So what does this mean for Arizona and the Republican Party? Here's Chuck Coughlin from High Ground Public Affairs in Phoenix.
Well, he came here very successful. One would argue that, he put lightning in his tank when he came out here the first time, in the early stages of his campaign, had a very successful rally, hit on some of these globalist themes, this anti-globalist economic theme, hit on our strained relationship with Mexico and what's been going on for a decade now, people fleeing Mexico and coming up here. And he framed that in a domestic policy question rather than a foreign policy question. And there's a lot of anger and a lot of angst, particularly in Arizona. It's the typical populist argument of making an argument, making somebody else the bad guy. And he's done that. I don't know where you end up with that if you believe, as Republican principles do, in terms of global trade and economic commerce and rising tide lifts all boats. I don't know where that ends up.
We will make America great again. Thank you, Arizona. God bless you. Thank you. Thank you.
The state a conservative stronghold. From the looks and sounds of this campaign rally years before a presidential election, Arizona appears to be a safe place for a Republican. And that's our program. For all of us at Arizona Public Media, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Thanks for joining us.